Are you unmuted?
Good morning. This is the fifth session in a series about Robert's Rules of Order in action. And today's session is about the role of the parliamentarian. Now, up to this point, we've examined Robert's rules. We've examined the role of the chair. And of course, their tool of their trade is the gavel to bring attention to themselves. But the parliamentarian, we see them at meetings, we hear about them at meetings, but really, where do we learn about the true role of the parliamentarian as an officer that provides support to the assembly and to the chair, the presiding officer, at any given meeting? It's actually hard work to try and identify the exact role of a parliamentarian. And the tool of their trade is a notebook. And I'll explain that as we go through today's presentation. So in any given organization, there are times in which meetings will be held. And the bylaws will usually define when and how often meetings are held. Could be a meeting of the members, what they colloquially will refer to as the annual general meeting. It could be a meeting of the board of directors. In both cases, there may be a perceived need for there to be a parliamentarian. Now, of course, I'm going to speak both from the perspective of Robert's Rules of Order and the Canadian parliamentary system adopted by Kerr and King. I'll just remind everyone, Kerr and King is essentially built on the platform of Robert's Rules of Order, but adds a few extra elements which are thoughtful and can be used by both disciplines without any question. And in the Kerr and King environment, they've taken the position of parliamentarian, and they actually define it to be a role by the name of preceptor. Now, this is a very interesting word because it's a word used in many professions, most notably the nursing profession, that when a student accomplishes a certain level of academic achievement, that they are put into practicum situations where they are getting their hands into providing treatments and care according to their academic training, but they also do this with the use of a preceptor. And so I find that very interesting, and I find it very interesting that Kerr and King has defined the role of preceptor. And it really does allow us to have a good understanding of the role of the parliamentarian. So a parliamentarian or a preceptor is a person who has expertise, expert knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order or whatever parliamentary system is being adopted. And there are many. There's more than just Roberts and Kerr and King. There's Gibson's. There's quite a number of them out there, though Robert's Rules of Order is the most commonly used system in North America. A parliamentarian is an expert in procedures for the conduct of meetings, as well as deliberative assemblies. A parliamentarian assists organization in the drafting and interpretation of bylaws and rules of order and the planning and conduct of meetings. All these fall under the purview of a parliamentarian. I remind everyone that bylaws are the rules put down in writing that provide governance for any organization. If it's a for-profit corporation, there's something called Articles of Incorporation, and contained within the Articles of Incorporation are the initial bylaws for the organization. And bylaws can usually be changed over time usually requires an onerous level of support, maybe 2/3 of the owners, but they are able to be changed as the organization requires, whereas the original articles of incorporation really can't be changed. And from the perspective of Toastmasters clubs, we have an international set of bylaws, and we have club bylaws, and the club bylaws in a limited fashion can be changed. We can enact changes to the times that our clubs meet. We can make changes to whether or not they're open to the general public or to closed membership. Those things can be changed by the membership of the organization. One of the first things a parliamentarian, when they receive an assignment, needs to think about is, where is the enacting power coming from? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's an onus put upon us as parliamentarians to seek out, ask for copies of the existing articles and bylaws. And we need to examine them and read them. And I find it very, very interesting in the case of Kerr and King, that parliamentary system very, very specifically says that they must be named in the governing documents, in that when the bylaws are formulated for the organization and they're intended for regulatory bodies, that the bylaws specifically name which parliamentary system is to be used. And that's one of the things that we're looking for. Now, in the case of a corporate organization, the likelihood that you're going to find words in the bylaws that specifically say that meeting of the shareholders will be governed by Robert's rules or Kerr and King, you're probably not going to find them, which leads us to one of the active roles of a parliamentarian, and that is the role of providing advice. And from my perspective, advice is done on what I would refer to as a submissive basis. Towards the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about the exit report that a parliamentarian does. And I see this as a very primary rule of the parliamentarian, in that after each event that they're engaged to watch is completed, they should prepare an exit report and provide in that report observations and potential recommendations for future improvements. This helps the organization that's governing the organization, and it helps the assembly. And if there is an absence of what I call empowering authority, in that the bylaws are silent, there's no discussion about the use of parliamentary process, then in an exit report, that's going to be one of the primary recommendations we're going to make, is that in future, when there's a revision of the bylaws, that revision should include a recommendation that meetings are governed by Robert's Rules of Order. That's put into the bylaws, and then that becomes the enacting authority that's automatically put in place for all meetings from that point on. Parliamentarian must assist the organization in the drafting and interpreting of bylaws. And when we do this from a perspective of experience. And I can share with you from experience that I always highlight to organizations that whenever issues involve money, and I'm talking about things like membership fees or dividends, anything that touches on money should be really an area that is of high attention, because that's what invariably creates controversy in any organization. So any issue involving the passing of a budget, the approval of financial statements, these types of things need to be attended to with high attention, because they invariably are the issues that invoke response from the organization's assembly. Parliamentarian is often asked by the client organization, given our current bylaws and standing rules, how do we do this, or what is the proper procedure to accomplish this objective? And that's a loaded question, because it implies that the parliamentarian not only is familiar with the bylaws specifically related to that organization, but they've taken the extra time and the extra investigative authority to come to understand standing practices and standing rules. And of course, early in this series, we discussed standing rules are problematic because they are rules that are imposed by the organization for the organization, and in many cases are known on an oral basis, but not on a written basis. And that's really not efficient. And so not only should standing rules be learned and understood by the parliamentarian from past practice, but they should also, in their exit report, if they observe that these standing rules are of an oral nature, that they should be placed in writing and that they should be circulated with the notice, an extra sheet, standing rules, and they're written down and understood, and preferably have been given an active authority. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, if we have a standing rule, for example, that if you are introducing a motion on the floor that spans more than 10 minutes, that you must write it down and give it to the secretary prior to making the motion on the floor, if that's a standing rule, a standing practice that's been adopted by the organization, then one, there should be an enabling resolution somewhere along the line, either by the shareholders or by the members or by the board, that says, a motion is made to this, it's seconded, it's debated, and it becomes approved, and then that documents how that standing rule was created. And it's got some enacting authority. Someone, somewhere in the organization, approved this thing. And so as a result, then the rule exists and it should be written down. There should be a handout, standing rules. And as people either in the notice that's sent out for the meeting or as they're coming into the meeting that's being called, they're handed in writing the standing rules so they have a good apprehension of the rules that are being used. They can construe the rules in any way they want, but they can know that the rules do exist. Parliamentarian, as a best practice, should review the governing documents and be able to provide an opinion on how to proceed. And what I like to do is whenever I'm offering a suggestion and an opinion, that I offer more than one choice. I give multiple alternatives. This is one way to deal with the issue. Maybe not such a good one, but this is another way to do this. Third way to do this, and I would offer as a suggestion the best of the three alternatives is this alternative. And so I always think in those terms. And so getting back to the first question, I'm happy to give an opinion. I've recently been called upon to do this because what was happening is within an environment where, yes, it's a regulated organization, and the organization has parliamentary rules placed into it for the meeting of their members. But a problem took place with their governing council. And the governing council is enacted by the bylaws, but did parliamentary processes impact the way the council was operating? And specifically, the issue involved was that a member from the public wanted to make a presentation to the governing council, and how was that to be handled? No one, this never happened before. No one knew what to do, so they came to their preceptor, to myself, to provide some guidance on how they could go about handling this. And I gave them actually 4 different alternatives. I'm not really sure which one they picked, but I gave them lots of alternatives to consider on how to go about with this situation. The role of the parliamentarian at an assembled meeting is to be a resource to the presiding officer. Now, I say this very, very carefully because I'm of the opinion that the parliamentarian is a recessive role. And the third point that I make here, the parliamentarian may, at the comfort of the presiding officer, sit adjacent to the presiding officer and is unobtrusive, gives the presiding officer help, guidance, and support during the meeting. Now, I have firsthand witnessed many organizations, including our own, where I've been very uncomfortable watching a parliamentarian interrupt the chair and got into an argument in the presence of the assembly with the chair. And the chair felt obliged to reverse their decision, which I thought was an appalling sequence of events. Because that's not the role of the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian is not an obstructive individual. They do not obstruct the progress of a meeting. They are there to be a support, a resource to the presiding officer. Now, if the presiding officer is not comfortable with the circumstances they find themselves in, and they turn to the parliamentarian and ask for a ruling or ask for advice, fair enough. But it is not the role of a parliamentarian to interrupt the chair and disrupt the meeting. Absolutely not. It's a recessive role. They are there to assist. They are there to, and one of the things I like to do is that prior to the meeting starting, I usually, as the parliamentarian, ask way in advance to meet with the presiding officer about 10 or 15 minutes before the meeting is called to order. And we have a quick little debriefing about the meeting and the issues that are on the agenda and areas that might be calling upon different aspects of parliamentary process. And as a result of that, what we could do as potential alternatives. And I highlight it, of course, anything involving money, because it's always the area that gets lots of participation from the membership. So I cannot stress this role enough. The parliamentarian at any assembled meeting is a resource person. They're there to provide guidance and support when called upon by the presiding officer. They are not and don't have any technical power to take over the meeting, to interrupt the meeting. And there have been times I'm going to myself as a parliamentarian, what is the presiding? But I'm going to let it go. I'm going to make notes. I got my notebook. This is what the notebook is for. I'm going to make notes, and it may well be in my exit report, but I'm not, until the presiding officer, and in the briefing, I share this with them. You call upon me to help when you need. If you feel uncomfortable, I'm here as a resource. I'm not going to interrupt you. You are the leader. You're the traffic cop. You're in charge of the meeting. But if you need help, I'm here. And I can be sitting with an eye shot. I can sit off to the side. I can sit right beside you. Whatever makes you comfortable, I'm happy to take on that role. And my role is to make sure that when you ask me a question, I can speak to it from the perspective of parliamentary process. I can speak to it from the perspective of the bylaws of the organization and from the perspective of if there's any standing rules that the organization has adopted that apply to the circumstance at hand. So the parliamentarian, to prepare for any assignment that they're engaged to take on, what should they be thinking of? Well, first thing you want to do is ask for the meeting minutes for the previous meeting. Doesn't matter if it's a meeting of the members last year, board meeting, doesn't matter. What happened at the previous meeting? What issues are coming forward? And so, what issues involve money? And Ask questions. Make sure that you're fully informed what the issues are. For example, if you're asking me a perfect example of this, I was once asked to be a parliamentarian for two organizations. It's actually quite funny. It was there were two organizations that were competing with each other that formed one new organization, the Saskatchewan Massage Therapy Association. Heaven knows a group where the members knew how to rub each other the wrong way. And it was just like that. It was actually quite funny. But it was two very different organizations with two very, very different sets of membership dues, one much more expensive than the other. And we were trying to take two constitutions and put them together. And so I went through my debriefing with the chair, who was very unsure of parliamentary process. And I said, can I offer a suggestion? He goes, what's that? And this is in the 10-minute briefing. He said, let's consider the new constitution paragraph by paragraph, because that may take a lot of time. I said, it'll go faster than you think. And asked the group to do one of three things: approve the paragraph, disapprove the paragraph, but we really want them to do, what we want them to do is pass it or refer it to bylaws committee. Pass it, refer it to bylaws committee. And he says, well, that sort of makes sense. I said, okay. And so he got up, called the meeting to order. This is what we're going to do. And we started with the first paragraph, passed. Second paragraph, passed. We could open a bank account. Third paragraph, passed. We had a head office address. Fourth paragraph, passed. And an hour later, we had a constitution in which 90% of it was approved and 10% was sent to the bylaw committee, the sections involving money, which I thought was rather funny. So, when we're preparing, we're really with a mind looking at the issues that involve money, because they're the ones that will be getting all the excitement. And just be informed how the organization works. Now, of course, the second year that you take on an engagement with a particular organization, you can rely on all your work and previous research. And it gets easier and easier with each year that you're involved with an engagement as a parliamentarian. But at first, there's a bit of work to do, because there's a saying in sales, and that is, you're going to be able to close the sale when you know more than the customer does. And as a parliamentarian, you become an expert that everyone relies upon when you've done your homework. You know the bylaws, you know the standing rules, you know the past meeting, you know the agenda at hand, and you can anticipate where the issues are. One thing we may seek out is, has there been a previous report by a previous parliamentarian? And this is one area that I really am quite saddened to see, that many, many parliamentarians have skills, witness things happening for an organization, and how does that organization ever improve if the parliamentarian doesn't provide an exit report? How do they ever get better? How do they know if they're doing things right or wrong? The parliamentarian knows. So why doesn't the parliamentarian issue an exit report? Now, I remember being at the division level and asked to be a division parliamentarian, and I sat in silence and watched everything going on. The meeting went well. And then I prepared a 5-page, it was quite an extensive document, which I sent to the division governor. And they were, because I brought to their attention, there were protocols from world headquarters that we weren't forming with. And why was that? Now, I didn't interrupt the meeting with this. I didn't distract the meeting with these points, but I certainly made sure in my exit report that I brought things that I observed that were not, from what I could observe, that could be improved upon, should be improved upon. And I found it interesting that in the years that followed, many of my recommendations were quietly adopted because people looked at it, researched, and went, there's something to this. I remember a district governor coming to me, I have that report of yours and I'm reading it and you are right. The more I investigate, the more I ask questions about it, every point that you make in your report is correct and I'm adopting your practices, which I found quite rewarding, as a parliamentarian. We work in a world of attention to detail. But one of the things that happens as the meeting is running, and this is not easy, is that you have the agenda in front of you and you see the issue that's before you and you're looking at the issue that'll come up. And what I do is I'll have my chart of accounts right there in front of me. I'll have a binder with the bylaws right there in front of me. And there was one organization in particular, it was the Association of Paramedics. And it was so interesting because there was a debate going on and the chair was doing a magnificent job of being the chair. And someone rose on a point of order. Can we do this? And the chair didn't know. So he turned to me and I rose from my chair. Mr. Chair, I bring everyone's attention to section 23, sub 4 of the bylaws of the organization. Let me read it out for you. And I read it out. I said, you are within your authority to deal with this matter. And then I sat down. And you could hear a pin drop in the room because I was right in the zone of what the issue was and what sections of the either parliamentary process or the bylaws applied in that moment to that circumstance. And I was ready. I was ready. I had turned to the page. I said, this is involving this section. Okay, involving this section. I'm saying this to myself. And then all of a sudden I'm called upon to speak to it. I was ready. I was ready to speak to it. And so there has to be a sense of anticipation by the parliamentarian, not just what we're speaking in the moment, but what's coming next, what's about to come. And where does that apply? In my exit reports, I like to note that this happened and it relates to this section of the bylaws or parliamentary process, because then it really brings meaning to everyone of how the system works. And one needs to be, and thank goodness for Toastmasters, this helps train us to be ready to effectively respond, because people are looking for an expert opinion and they're looking for it on a very, very rapid basis so the meeting can proceed. They don't need to see someone turning pages and I'm not sure, I'll get back to you. They don't need that. They need an answer now. So that means you have an understanding of the agenda, you have an understanding of each issue that's coming up. You may have even anticipated which sections of parliamentary process or the bylaws will apply, and you're following along. And you have the information, turn to the information, ready to pounce on the moment. And this partly was trained into me by the group of individuals where there was, back in the 1980s, a lot of attention to parliamentary process, that being Plains Toastmasters Club. And they taught me this, how you needed to be Johnny on the spot, ready to go and following along as the meeting progresses, which is not easy. But it's part of being a parliamentarian. The role is recessive when a parliamentarian needs to be alert, and you need to be keeping detailed notes as the meeting progresses, because how can you build an exit report unless you have detailed notes? How can you do that? I'm here to share with you, you can't. And so you need to identify who said what, when, almost like being a recording secretary, but you're doing it from a different perspective. You're not doing it to capture every piece of information. You're doing it from the perspective, good job. Motion, seconded, good job. And I do a little tick mark, and then, ooh, I wouldn't have done that. this should have been referred to a bylaws committee. Okay, but they dealt with this way. Okay, I'm not going to say anything at the meeting, but I probably will put it into the exit report, which can be considered by the leadership of the organization for the next time they conduct a meeting. And trust me, the impact of the exit reports is dramatic on an organization. They really like it. They get real value from it. They change their processes to adopt from things they learn, because they don't know parliamentary process. It's not something they deal with every day. And so when someone with expertise offers them input, they like it. They soak it up and invariably will adopt it. So these are notes for the exit report. I can't emphasize enough, really class thing to do as a parliamentarian is to ask for an audience with the chair 10 minutes or 15 minutes before the meeting. The chair is so grateful for this. And usually what I do in this process, you're the boss. I'm here to help. I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm going to be available at any moment. Now, let's look at the agenda. So we'll call the meeting to order. And then one of the most important things happens, motion to accept the agenda. That's very, very important. Now, if that comes up, people can change the order, but they cannot add a new item because it wasn't in the notice. Now, if they need to talk about something new, something new comes up, great. Allow the person to stand, let them talk, and say to them, this wasn't in the notice of the meeting, but we'll put this as notice for the next meeting. Thank you for this important topic. We will deal with it at the next meeting. And if at that stage there's some sort of confusion or just non-acceptance, I'm going to call upon the parliamentarian now, because you're now transferring. It's not me anymore, transferring it to parliamentarian, and then I'll stand. The chair is exceptionally correct. They have rightfully pointed out that this issue is new, not in the notice. People made a decision not to come to this meeting because the issue was not in the notice. Therefore, it's appropriate to accept the issue. We can have a little discussion about it, but we can't enact upon it, but we'll put it in as a notice of motion for the next meeting, and we can deal with it properly with full knowledge and everyone's participation at the next meeting. I concur with the ruling of the chair. And so I in that 10-minute meeting, I'm saying these words to the chair so they can get a sense of how things can be handled if something's controversial. And they're so grateful. Afterwards, they always say to me, I'm so glad you're here. It was really a good idea to have the parliamentarian here. You didn't really do much, but you made me feel a lot better. Right? And then they get the exit report. And that's really another issue that creates high attention. Now, the exit report. Now, I've carefully taken one of the past ones that I've issued, and I've carefully, maybe not entirely perfectly, but I tried to change the names to protect the innocent. And you can see that what I observed in this circumstance was they really weren't following, in the parliamentary system occurring King, the agenda is actually set out. You can't monkey with it. You can't create your own. It's actually imposed by the parliamentary process. And I brought this to their attention. Now, I didn't say anything during the meeting. Why would I? But as an exit report, I shared an observation you may wish to consider following current King, because your regulatory bylaws require that you do. And if you go to this section 73, it lays out to you a beautiful agenda. Just follow it. Just follow the agenda that's laid out for you in current King when you have your next meeting. That's a recommendation. And then one of the things I like to throw into my exit reports is not only a discussion of the agenda item, but what I like to do is I like to offer a recommendation that you, in brackets, in italics below each issue, lay out how it works. For example, a substantial motion is like a main motion to approve the minutes of the prior meeting. And so there's limited debate. It is amendable as approved by 51% of the voting members. And what this does is permit not only the chair to understand how this is to be handled, but it's given to the assembly. And everyone in the assembly knows exactly how this is to be handled. And it really helps. So it's a substantive motion. It's under section 136 of the current King system. And as a result, this is how we handle it. And so I love giving these kinds of recommendations in my exit report. And in every case, I'll come back the next year and I just smile to myself because the agenda fully adopts this system and everyone is impressed because I now see how this works. Okay. And for example, in Robert's Rules of Order, we have a motion to adopt a report, and in Current King, receive a report. But you can create that as a standing rule if you want, which is not debatable. You just receive the report. It's really quite slick, right? But and we can adopt this in Robert's Rules as a standing rule if we want to. And I encourage this all the time. Don't approve the report, just receive it. Because it's already written. What are you going to change? You can't change someone's report. Just receive it. And so it's a recommendation, and then that's contained within the exit report, and they have the choice to think about it and adopt it as a practice in the future. And then, exit reports to me are one of the most important things we do as parliamentarians. And I'm saddened to say, virtually no one does this. And why not? I don't get it. To me, it's just an essential part of being a parliamentarian. So I always get the question, how much should you charge as a parliamentarian? Well, it's a matter of personal choice. It's a matter of whether or not you're being called upon to provide service to a for-profit or nonprofit organization. I always suggest that you do fees. It could be $75, could be $500. One suggestion I offer for consideration, which is well received, especially by nonprofits, is that if I'm being approached for the first time by a nonprofit organization, I'll say, well, my fee is $500, but tell you what, you're a nonprofit organization. I'm going to invoice you for $500. I'll expect it to be paid, but separate from that, I'm going to be giving a donation to your organization for $500. And this is a practice that's well received. And sometimes I'll be asked, well, why do you want to do this? I said, because if anyone asks what my fee is, you're going to say, this fellow was $500, and you're free to say that he contributed his time. And I've actually seen the chair announce this at a meeting. I want to really thank the parliamentarian. His fee is $500, and he's making a donation back to our organization in the same value as his level of service, and I want to thank him for that. But it communicates to everyone that the service that's being provided has value. And then in the second year, okay, so it's $500, and I donate back $400, and then you can see how you can develop a relationship with a potential client. Of course, when we're working as parliamentarians, we have our chart of accounts. We're working with the order of precedence, and that's how we go about doing our roles as parliamentarians. So just to really wrap up and just review this whole area, the parliamentarian is an important officer at any assembly, whether or not it's an association meeting of members, an annual general meeting for condominiums, board of directors meetings, but it's a role that assists the presiding officer. Under no circumstances should there ever be a circumstance where the parliamentarian interrupts or disrupts the chairperson. They're there as a resource. They're there to observe. They're there to anticipate. They're there to keep detailed notes. They're there to provide a ruling when called upon to do so. They are there to provide opinions when asked to do so by the organization. And they're there to help the organization grow and improve through, after having an active component to their parliamentary assignment, to providing an exit report that allows the organization the opportunity to improve and grow in the area of using parliamentary process, which is an area they only use periodically, like once a year. And so one has to be very conscious of that and work with that. In these ways, you can be an active parliamentarian.